I want to start off by something that is there in pop culture. The Barbie Oppenheimer whole phenomenon that's happened. I would highly recommend not to watch this movie, but I somehow had to watch this movie because I want to keep a pulse on culture and what's happening. And one of the things that Barbie tries to bring out, Greta Gerwig, who is the director, okay, she has a strong understanding of the things that are going on in culture. And so Barbie is sort of a metaphor for the crisis in culture, and hugely the identity crisis, the crisis of women in culture. All right. And what is one of the themes that is there? All right. So the quick story without any spoilers is, there's this whole Barbie land where everything is beautiful. Women are doctors, women are lawyers, women kind of control the society that's there. And then after that, they have to go into the real world, and they see the difference in the real world and how that brings about a crisis. And one of the things that it's bringing out is this definition of what it means to be a woman in this world. How do I understand, for Barbie, how does she understand herself as a woman in this world? And how do you bring that in? And it is a huge crisis, especially in Western culture. And because in one sense, Western culture and American culture dominate the cultural phenomenon and force its ideas into the rest of the world, we are inevitably caught up in this cycle. What does it mean to be a woman? What does it mean to be of any particular gender? But in this particular case, what does it mean to be a woman? And the end, it says, you need to forge your own identity. There is nothing predefined. There's nothing set. There is no objective reality from which we gain what it means to be either a man or a woman. There's none of those things that is set. So you have to make your own identity. You have to forge your own identity. And that is a reflection of the thinking that is there. That there is no predefined standard from which we understand what it means to be any particular gender. And that is the narrative. That is the dominant cultural narrative. And that is the cultural narrative that we live in. And then we need to understand, as Christians, how do we navigate our space here? The Bible very clearly has a vision of gender. All right. And so Genesis 1:27 says, so God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. What the Bible starts off is this vision that man and women together reflect a glory of God, that there is a uniqueness, that there is a difference that is there. And it's a beautiful difference. There is an order. There is a divine objective standard. Now, how those standards need to kind of apply in society will vary. All right. Sometimes we have strong stereotypes which need to be broken down, and that we will talk about. But what it says is there is a difference, and there is the beauty of difference between a man and a woman, what we uniquely bring into the table that reflects God as a whole. And to reduce that dimension, to say that there is no predefined condition, is to, in one sense, not just reduce humanity, but reduce our vision of who God is as image bearers, as those who reflect. And so the Bible, in one sense, goes completely counter to what Western culture tries to promote, or tries to say that there is no objective reality out there. There is no objective definition of what it means to be a man or what it means to be a woman. You need to make it on your own. You need to kind of define it. And in one sense, who defines it is, in one sense, culture defines it. Culture will define it, and you become part of or a product of it. And so the Bible starts with a stark opposite of it. Where are we? In one sense, where we could place us is we are in an interplay of three different cultures. As Christians, we are living in this world. One of the things that Jacob Cheriyan is going to do is, how do you interpret the Bible, from its culture, and then where we are in our culture. And so that's what Jacob is going to do in the next session. But here, what I want to place before us is we are inevitably in a play, in a confluence of three different cultures. One is the biblical worldview, and the Bible was written for, at that time, the Middle Eastern world, the Jewish world, first century, the New Testament, the first century, much older than that. And so you have that world that is there. And it's not that particular culture that we move to, but the vision of God that the Bible promotes. Who is God? And from God, how do we understand who we are? And so first we have the biblical worldview. And as Christians, that is our foundation. That is where we stand. That is where we are supposed to stand, from which we understand who we are, who others are around us, what the world is. So first is the biblical worldview. And then you have the dominant Western cultural narratives. And at any point in time, there is always some nations which will define the culture for the world. During the time of the Bible, it was the Greeks. The Romans set up the administrative system, but the cultural thinking was from the Hellenized world, the Greek world. They are the dominant culture. They are the America of its time, and it's going to change from time to time. Britain was the dominant cultural narrative creators for its time. So at any point in history, there will always be some nations that puts their idea of what it needs, what a culture needs to be, what a nation needs to be, what people needs to be onto the rest of the world. And we can't do away with it. We have to live in a globalized world. We have to be able to live with it. We cannot live in our silos. So we will inevitably be affected by Western cultural narratives that's there through our social media, and right now a lot more open channels to understanding that. So first you have the biblical worldview, where we are supposed to stand. But as we stand there, then you have an influx of your Western cultural worldview that is there, your Western cultural narrative, and then where we are, our genetic roots, our Indian cultural narrative, our Indian cultural identity. And that is a unique identity, comes through us, through our tradition, through our history. It speaks a lot, just by the way in which we dress and speak and conduct our life, a lot of those aspects come. And so here we are as Christians, rooted in the Bible, or called to be rooted in the Bible, but influenced by Western cultural narrative and our own history. And all these, our navigation is through all of these, this complex landscape of the biblical worldview, Western cultural narrative, and Indian cultural narrative. Now, what I want to do is I want to go through each one of these and then maybe end with some pointers. We will never arrive at any answers. And maybe the human journey is not to have very clear-cut answer to these things, but to navigate the complexity of life. And what God gives us is the ability to navigate those complexities. We will make mistakes, along that journey, we will make mistakes. With each time brings in new ideas. What Jacob Cheriyan was looking into AI. It's a completely new phenomenon. We have no idea how to navigate. Yes, we can come up with particular theory, but it's just thrown into society. But we have to be able to navigate those kind of spaces. So life is being able to navigate those aspects. Let me start off with the first one, all right? So the Western cultural narrative. One of the dominant things that happened with the Western cultural narrative and after Sigmund Freud and things like that is the opening up of the whole sexual revolution. That suddenly there was this move towards freedom. Freedom is everything, and there was a huge move towards freedom as the pinnacle of human endeavor. It's almost the replacement of God towards more move towards freedom. And their misconstruing of freedom, or the misunderstanding of freedom is you can do whatever you want. All right. And so then you have this whole move of the sexual revolution that's going to come about, and the problems that is going to come about because of it. You can see the LGBTQ problem has its genesis in this whole sexual revolution, where you have this freedom to do whatever you want, freedom to use your bodies in whatever you want. But as human beings, if we think about it, we actually don't desire unlimited freedom. Like, I have a daughter and she's 3 years old. And one of the things that my wife and I have found out is, if we are able to provide a routine for her, give her a time to sleep, give her a time to wake up, give her food on time, give her a place to play. It's not like she can play in the kitchen and all over the place. There's a particular place with particular toys. Give her those boundaries. She can flourish under those boundaries. That if we are able to put certain boundaries around her, that she can, which are appropriate, she can use her freedom within those boundaries. If there are no boundaries, if all those boundaries are opened up, it does not lead to human flourishing. What human beings need is not absolute freedom to, it is always, why does the Old Testament talk about the moral law? Because freedom for human beings is found under God's law, under the bracket that God has given us. And if we are able to understand what those boundaries are, it can lead to human flourishing, not just for us as a society, but us as individuals. And so when you take God out of the picture, then you have this huge move towards this whole sexual revolution that's there. One of the things is the pill itself, to control your biological factors, and what that is going to do, how that is going to change people's view of it. So one of the things which comes up in the whole Western cultural narrative is this idea of the sexual revolution. And it comes out in many ways. They say there's a study done that in the 1990s, all right, more than 6 young developing countries, India included, democratic countries, which opened up television to the Western world. So you have India, you have South Africa, and so on. A lot of our sexual ethics was defined by the series Friends. So the sitcom series Friends is going to define how we need to relate and engage with each other. That is going to be the dominant influential force, not any of our history or not any of our social cultural narratives that is there, but a sitcom series is going to radically influence people's understanding of identity and interrelations, right? Second move, okay, part of the Western culture, all right, is this whole radical feminism that is there. A complete breakdown of the that everything in the past was a product of patriarchy, and it's not that there is no truth in it. There's always elements of truth in these things. But the work of the devil is to always take some amount of truth and be able to distort it. And so you have a radical feminist move that is there, challenging everything that is there in the patriarchy. Everything is a product of the patriarchy. Women needs to have these kind of rights in every particular situation, a type of equality that is utopian in that. The problem here is, and this is written by a Christian, it's like a lot of these structures, whether it's the corporate structure or any organization, has already been set by certain men and masculine thinking. So the hierarchy, the pyramid has already been set, and women's fight for equality is already in a pyramid or in a scheme or an organization that's set by masculine tendencies. And so feminism is to always rethink those parameters, not just be rise to the top of these hierarchies. So there's a lot more thinking that needs to be understood. And in one sense, he said, in one sense, the Bible is the only framework from which we can rethink those organizations in culture. Because if not, then your radical feminist move is to just give in to the patriarchy. It's a complicated understanding that is there. But what it says, what the radical feminist move, especially in the West, is a complete liberation movement towards the challenging things within the patriarchy. All right. And then third, gender fluidity. All right. And this is all very interconnected. You will see all these three are very interconnected. What does it mean to be a woman? Well, there is no definition. If you feel like you are a woman, then you become a woman. And all of you who are part of your corporate jobs and things like that will see your HR and how they enforce this ideology into you. Whatever the LGBTQ movement, gender fluidity. And I believe that, as in one sense, it's not necessary as Christians to always point out the flaws in it, because in one sense, society itself is opening up the flaws to it. So, for example, sports. You want this kind of gender equality and fluidity and things like that, but when it comes to sports, no, it's not equal. You cannot have those segregation, because if a man feels like he's a woman and then competes in a domain which is particularly for women, he would obviously win those. And so then you need to kind of again get in and again kind of create systems. One of the things that the world tries to do is try to create these systems, and then they have to deal with the problem of these systems. It is the original sin. It is the Tower of Babel. You try to create a system on your own, it will ultimately collapse and create more confusion. So one of the things about the Western cultural narrative is there is no objective standards. It's a revolt against the Bible. It is a revolt against God. It is a revolt towards anything that standards that God sets towards a complete and absolute freedom created by human beings themselves, which leads to anarchy, which leads to chaos. All right. So that is the Western cultural narrative that we are living. Second, Indian cultural narrative. All right. Now here I want you to, now a huge part of your notes is connected to this particular thing. And what I want to see is, I'm not endorsing these ideas that is there, but I'm just talking about the phenomenon and what these phenomena show and how Indians have grappled with the idea of women and womanhood through the ages. Now, it's not exhaustive, of course, but it's a quick snapshot, an overview of Indian thought and how throughout history Indians have grappled with the phenomenon of what it means to be a woman and our interactions as a society. If I could divide it into different stages, that's there. You could start with the oldest of it, the Manusmriti, and the Manusmriti starts with a very patriarchal understanding. And this is not unique in Indian culture. It's in cultures across the world. All right, in cultures across the world, it always starts with men and very masculine dominations, and they set up these systems. And so the role of women within the Manusmriti or any of the ancient Indian texts is very minimal. They play a very supporting role that is there. They understand certain things in nature are feminized, and they've always played a very supporting role. And so even the picture there, of Sati that came and that emerged, that always there. It's a very masculine way. You don't want after marriage. You don't want you want to preserve your wife's sacredness towards you, and so in the sense you come up with customs and traditions to preserve that. And so it's very masculine, it's very patriarchal, it's very masculine, men dominated, and women play a very supportive role, a subjugated supportive role that's there. It's not unique to Indian tradition, it's common across civilizations, and Indian civilizations was part of it. There was a move towards a lot more women empowerment during the Shakti traditions. Now, the Shakti traditions is the emergence of, power that people understood that women have a unique power that have to be understood and have to be harnessed. So a lot of these narratives and a lot of these stories, whether it's Durga or Kali, I'm not looking into the religious element of it. I'm looking at the phenomenon that it's trying to say. What is the phenomenon? What are the stories trying to say? That there are certain things, there's this evil that comes about, this Rakta Beej and these kind of evil, and men are not able to fight it because it's a different type of evil, and they cannot use their mind and their forces to destroy this evil. But women can. Women have a different way of approaching it. It is in one sense to show that women have unique abilities that men do not have. And we should not even try to harness that power. We should leave that. It's a uniquely woman power that is there in order to understand and retaliate. And so what Indian tradition moved towards is an understanding and appreciation that women have unique powers which cannot be replicated by a man, and hence it's preserved. Now, how society in fallen nature kind of warps these is to idolize these things. But this is the idea that comes about, a unique understanding of women and their power. Then later on in the 15th century, another element of women's understanding that's going to come is the ability of women to be absolutely loving and devotional. And that is going to be incorporated into Indian society. You have examples of Mirabai and things like that, to love God with everything that they have. And this is a unique move within Indian traditions, that God can actually be loved and held close and be devoted to. And there's a soft feminine, this whole feminine aspect of loving God is a move which is uniquely placed because of the devotion of certain women. And these stories start coming into culture and then holding culture in its grip. That there is this nurturing aspect of culture, that there is this aspect of culture where you can love God as you would love someone else, and it's not there within Indian culture. It's there highly in Christianity, but it wasn't there previously within Indian thought and Indian culture. And one of the things that Bhakti movement brings out is this feminine quality of loving and nurturing, which men within that society felt we have to imbibe, we have to be able to bring within ourselves. And so that the religious landscape moved in that direction. All right. So it starts off very patriarchal, then an understanding of the unique position of women, and then towards the Bhakti tradition. And finally, in the 1990s, what you have is the role of the modern Indian woman. One of the things that I do with Culture Unraveled is to say that movies and music say a lot about culture, say a lot about society. If millions of people are watching this particular movie, then there is something about the movie or something about the theme of that movie that is touching a chord with hundreds of people or millions of people. That means it's speaking. It's speaking to society. It's telling where society is headed. And so you have in the 1990s, when Manmohan Singh opened up, liberalized the economy and things like that, you have the emergence of the modern Indian woman, symbolized with Karan Johar's movie through Rani Mukherjee. But then that's where it's going to go. The world is going to move in that direction. All right. You are going to have the emergence of the modern woman who, in one sense, is planted deeply in the soil of India, all right, the traditions of India, but in one sense, globalized, influenced by aspect. And cultures always evolve in that direction. And once it evolves in that direction, there's no turning back. It will always move in that. And so you have this, all right. So the emergence of the modern Indian woman, which is going to be influenced by ideas of the West, but still looks at it from a very unique Indian vantage point. And so there you have it. And one of the things within Indian culture is almost sometimes the opposite of the Western culture, where there might be very strong objective traditional understandings that is there. The Western narrative is complete breakdown of anything that is objective, any standard, complete freedom, try to make your own way. Whereas sometimes within Indian culture, it is sometimes the exact opposite. A complete thinking that certain aspects about tradition and certain roles that are there with gender are written in stone, and then there is a complete objectivization of certain things in tradition. And to break down that, it is so interesting to see someone playing the electric guitar, a girl playing the electric guitar, it's a stereotype sometimes we have these kind of stereotypes that these are particular roles, and then none of these are biblical, it's all culturally formed. The biblical idea gives a vision of what men and women is, but not in the particularities of it. Particularities is for us to understand and move forward. So there you have it, Western culture, Indian culture, and now I want to go into the biblical worldview. And one of the things that we see, like we were talking about it here, we do not see any stereotypical biblical character. Sometimes we preach only, Ruth, this nice, obedient, daughter-in-law. Those are some of the stories that you take. But that's not the only story that is there. You have very different women. You have Deborah, who's courageous, a strong leadership characteristic. You have wisdom. You have Esther being brave. You have a plethora of women. You have very distinct characteristics that is displayed here. None of these can be pigeonholed. None of the characteristics that you've said, a lot of it might be traditionally looked at as only masculine qualities. Well, the Bible does not fall into any of those categories. It completely breaks down those categories. That here, to be a woman is to, yes, understand the vision of God, but how it manifests itself in a wide array of displays, in a wide range of displays. I just want to hone in or focus in, particularly in Exodus and the story of Moses. And from the birth of Moses, you see the heroes, the women characters are in that particular story. It's amazing how the story is crafted and how they have portrayed their women. The Hebrew midwives. It starts with the Hebrew midwives, all right. Exodus 1:15 to 17. Then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shipra and the other was named Puah. And he said, when you are helping the Hebrew women to give birth and see them upon the birth stool, if it is a son, then you shall put him to death. But if it's a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt had. Right? So here is a decree. All right. And in one sense, it is the idea of the Egyptians to take out all the male. And if they take out all the male, then in one sense, who has to impregnate them? It's the men. It's the Egyptian men. And it's the idea to eradicate the masculine element that is there, and then they become, and to reduce them to that particular role. And this charge was given to the Hebrew midwives to do it. And what the Hebrew midwives do is something astounding. This is the first case of civil disobedience recorded in history. The Pharaoh is equivalent to God at that point. The Pharaoh is the highest authority of the land. There is no other authority than the Pharaoh, the visible authority. The Hebrew midwife says, no, there is a greater authority than Pharaoh himself, God. And we will listen to God and obey him in our conscience and not do what the Pharaoh says. And they are going to reject. And this is such a brave act. You have cases of civil disobedience happening in the 19th century, but here it's way back where you are the first case of civil disobedience happening. Courage to be able to take a stand despite the highest authority of the land giving you a command what to do. And in one sense, you see how they shrewdly navigate their way around it. And you see later on the passage saying, God blessed them and gave them children of their own. So here you have the birth of Moses, and it starts off with the heroic act of the Hebrew midwives to bravely and courageously go against a decree of the Pharaoh. Then, next one. You have Moses' mother, all right. So, in 2, 1 to 4. Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a daughter of Levi, and the woman conceived and gave birth to a son. And when she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could no longer hide him, she got him a papyrus basket and covered it with tar and pitch. And then she put the child in it and set it among the reeds by the bank of the river Nile. And the word there in Hebrew is almost the same word that you use that when Noah built the ark. Noah built the ark and saved the world. It's the same word that is being used, the same idea that is conveyed here. That what is she doing? She's actually in one sense saving the world. It is in and through this line that God has promised, that from which salvation is going to come into the world. And what she is doing is saving the world. She is the central character here, saving the world, creating a basket to protect this child. And then you have the same thing with the sister following him, very, very shrewdly following him, and then speaking to the Pharaoh's daughter, and then the Pharaoh's daughter herself, all right, who's accepting a child of the other. It's breaking down cultural and ethnic boundaries and accepting the child of the other. What you see here is definitely a nurturing element that is there, but very brave, very heroic. None of the women are moving away from that nurturing element. That nurturing element is there, steeped in our biology, steeped in the way God has made women. It's difficult for me to deny that. When I see my wife and the relationship that she has with my daughter, there is a biological nurturing element that is there. And that is being used. And that is heroically being used here to move the story forward, in one sense, to save the world. And so here you have the heroes of the Bible, all right, using the gifts that God has given them, using the aspects that God has given them, and navigating the complexities of culture in order to bring something great about. Now, I want to end with 5 different points. And so you have the Western cultural narrative here, you have the Indian cultural narratives, which we are steeped in, and the biblical cultural narrative or the biblical worldview, which we are called to follow, which we stand on, and how we navigate these 3. All right. So here are some pointers that we can think of. Firstly, one of the things that the Western world tries to bring is a utopian understanding of what it means to be equal. A utopian understanding of what it means to have freedom. And the first thing to do is to understand, what does the Bible mean by equality? How do we engage? Or as men, to understand what does it mean for a woman to be equal, for a woman to understand what does it mean for a man to be equal, and together for us to understand what does it mean for us to work that together. And I know that there are complexities that is there. I know each church has a position that is there. And the more you are able to do it together, the more you are able to do it together as a community with your Bible as the foundation from which you are able to take and look at it, And what we will learn from the next session is some good interpretation principles. We are able to apply these interpretation principles to see what does it mean for a man and woman to relate with each other and to bring about unity. Second one, okay, critique dominant cultural narratives. And the natural human tendency is, if we are not critiquing cultural narratives, then culture is going to dictate its narratives on us. We're going to take certain things in culture as very obvious. And this is something that we millennials and Gen Z have to be able to be attuned to. Whatever narratives are being said to us, and you cannot escape it, whether it's in music, whether it's in the movies that you watch, or whether it's in the conversations that you have with your colleague, always these dominant cultural narratives will play itself out, will work itself into it. And if we are not critiquing it from a biblical perspective, then in one sense we are giving into a narrative that is there. We are just it is a sin of acquisition. No, it's not a, it's just a default thing that you will follow, this default narrative that you will move into. So secondly, critique dominant narrative. If this is what culture is saying, what does the Bible say about it? Is it really true? Will it bring human flourishing? Does this mean, is this the understanding of what it means to be a woman? For a man to understand, is this what it means to relate with another woman? All right. So critique dominant cultural understanding. Third, embrace the uniqueness of your own culture. One of the things that we do, one of the things that we have to understand is that we are Indian Christians. That's who we are. It isn't, why are we here? We could have been born at any point in time, at any period in history, we could have been born in New Zealand in the 15th century or China in the 18th century. We would all look very different and things like that. But whatever it is, for whatever reasons, God has placed us in this land, and it's sacred. There is something sacred about our culture. Not everything is, but there is a beauty about certain aspects of our culture. And for whatever reasons, the type of Christianity which has been handed to us has a huge Western flavor to it. What does it mean to be uniquely Indian and Christian? What is the aspects about our culture that we need to embrace, that we need to hold on to? And what is the beauty that is there? What beauty is there that can shine light to the rest of the world within our culture? It is every tongue and tribe that is going to be at the feet of Jesus Christ in the eschaton. And so there is something beautiful about our history and our tradition that we will bring. So look at things that in our past, in our culture, I'm married to a Tamil woman, and one of the things that I noticed about Tamil women is they're very strong-willed. They have a particular leadership quality. I'm not saying that other cultures don't. It's just my experience with my wife, who's a Tamil woman, and she's a very strong character. I can't get away with anything, and you see that. Even in Ponniyin Selvan, which was written, Kalki wrote it. You see those characters that is there. Whether it's Kundavai, all those Nandini. None of those are like damsel in distress. Like a Snow White or a Cinderella who requires a prince to come and save them or anything like that. They're very strong characters in and of themselves. There's something very, very potent about that. And so it is something that we can embrace, our unique Indian regional cultural identities, to be able to embrace that as sacred, as unique, and to hold that and not be able to diminish that or not let other cultural narratives whitewash that. Men, all right. Then you might be thinking this whole talk is for women. No, it's not. All right. So each one of us to be able to engage. All right. Be empathetic. All right. There is certain aspect of the softness that women bring. Learn to understand what that is and be able to embody it. Marriage is like an obvious journey which will move you in that direction anyhow. But for any culture to flourish, they have been able to hold the uniqueness of their women. If we don't, if we subjugate that aspect, we will never flourish as a culture. We will never progress as a culture. Any culture that has progressed has been able to understand the uniqueness of the women in their particular culture and be able to allow that to grow and allow that to flourish. And if we can, then we create a society that can flourish. Be empathetic, be understanding of the other. Yes, they think differently, they act differently. How do I understand that? How do I imbibe that? And how do I move that forward? And finally, it is this, all right? And this is for each one of us thing, each one of us is called with sacred rights, and none of us should puff that up and none of us should shrink that down. We stand our sacred ground. That is who we are. Whoever you are, whatever God has called you to be, don't puff up, don't be something more than that. Understand what the vision of God is, understand the cultural dynamic, but don't puff up more than that. Don't shrink back less than that. Stand your sacred ground, whatever that means, however that means. Sometimes power is not magnanimously given from top to bottom. There requires a certain level of articulation and a standing strong of your position. It might be difficult, but sometimes it requires that in order for dialogue, in order to facilitate dialogue. So don't puff up, don't shrink back, stand your sacred ground.